Chapter 15 takes us to the practice of contemplative spirituality through sacred reading. Um, he talks about four basic movements to sacred reading. And really, to summarize, I think that sacred reading is an ancient practice that is awesome to experience. It's kind of a more experiential way of doing devotions, if you will. And it's a little more than that. But he talks about four movements. You begin with reading, and this reading is with the intention of being shaped by the Word rather than just informed by the Word. So it's kind of reading with a mind of how is this uh, affecting me? How is this shaping me? And then you go from reading to meditation. And this meditation is really inviting Christ to be formed in us by deliberately meditating on his words. And meditation really has to do with chewing on. Um, for instance, 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, "No temptation has overtaken us except such as is common to man." Meditating on that might be, well, okay, so I'm facing a temptation that everybody else is facing. What does this mean to me? He provides a way of escape. What are some of these ways of escape? What is meant by way of escape? And I'm just chewing on that and ruminating on that throughout the day. Um, then it moves from reading to meditation to prayer. And prayer is the response to the movements of reading and meditation, and it's more of a dialogue rather than a monologue. He points out that a lot of our prayer turns in kind of a monologue to God, whereas as in the sacred reading, this prayer is really more of a dialogue in which we're responding to that we've been chewing on and that which we've read. And then it moves from reading to meditation to prayer to contemplation. And I would really describe contemplation as the application part. It is a listening part of prayer. I believe the table in chapter 15 or table 15.1 is very, very useful when it comes to understanding contemplation or contemplative prayer. We continue on with chapter 16, which is primarily about falling in love with God. I thought the enemies of spiritual passion and the areas of cultivating spiritual passion were very interesting. He mentioned enemies of spiritual passion are unresolved areas of disobedience. If there's areas where we know we're out of the will of God, complacency. I've always described complacency as different than contentment. Contentment is being okay with where you are and just having the peace of God. Complacency is being where you are, but not recognizing that there's danger in what you're doing or danger around you, or not being aware of the extremes. So unresolved areas of disobedience, complacency, erosion of spiritual disciplines. Um, this one was hard for me to swallow for some reason because maybe it's revealing of my own life. Um, I think if we are not practicing the presence of God, whatever that is for some people, then it's a pretty good indicator that our passion is going away. External disobedience. External obedience. I thought this was really interesting and perhaps something that I've fallen into in the past, and that is if all my I's are dotted and all my T's are crossed, then I'm okay. This too can be a killer of spiritual passion. Um, Loving truth more than Christ. Wow. I love this insight. A lot of times we can be so passionate about being Wesleyan or so passionate about being Calvinist or so passionate about being from Rosedale Church or whatever it might be that we really love winning more than we do Christ. Um, the next one's kind of like it, elevating service and ministry above Christ. Sometimes I think we get ourselves really busy um, so we don't have to spend time in the presence of God, even busy doing good things. Mary and Martha are a great example of this from Scripture, of serving versus sitting at the feet of Jesus. Um, Greater commitment to institutions than Christ. I already kind of touched that in loving truth more than Christ, And then merely a functional relationship, one that's working. It's okay. I'm saved. I'm okay. That can be a killer of spiritual passion. Likewise, the areas of cultivating spiritual passion, um, growing awareness of God as a person, sitting at the feet of Jesus, imitating the Master, cultivating spiritual affections, increasing appreciation for the goodness of God, focused attention, willingness to let God break our outward self, desire to please God more than impress people, treasuring God, maturing in trust. Um, Maturing in trust, I think, is interesting, and that is um, one of the things I've realized is God has provided my needs time and time and time again, and at times I've not allowed my trust to mature. He's done it before. I should be able to trust Him to do it again. So, in summary, we must know Him to love Him. We must love Him to obey Him. We must obey Him to abide in Him, and we must abide in Him to bear fruit, and we must bear fruit in order to glorify Him. Thus, when it comes to devotional spirituality, the love of a holy God has been made known to us. We love Him because He first loved us. And this love for God produces a Christ-like life and truly conforms us to His image. Now, you'll notice that I posted a couple of additional articles, and in fact, your discussion questions are kind of coming off of those articles. Um, the uh, the summary of the Ethic of Love by Dr. Leedy, I believe, articulates well the relationship of God's holiness, His glory, and His love, and then how we relate to God in these areas. I would encourage you to keep in mind as you read this article that his criticism of Billy Graham and the, quote, New Evangelicals, although it was written several years ago, is not necessarily my views or the views of KCBS, although I think they're very, very insightful, and it's good for us to not criticize others carrying the flag of Christ, but it's good for us to really think about whether we are really being ambassadors of truth or not. So I really think his observations are very noteworthy, applicable, that loving people and loving God is not an excuse to be passive about God's holiness. And a lot of times we'll hear this, at least, and maybe even reflect this in our own life. Well, it's not about what I do anyway. Well, who we love affects what we do. And then Dr. Philip Brown's notes on loving God are extremely helpful to those of us trying to wrap our minds around the love of God. This is an impossible task. Nobody can really help us understand and experience God's love. Uh, love of God, no tongue or pen can e'er describe, as one song says. But I love his definition of loving God, and I think it's very, very biblical, and he kind of outlines that. His definition is to love God is to self-sacrificially commit oneself to delighting in Him, rejoicing in serving Him, uh, to desire continually to please Him, to seek our happiness in Him, and to thirst day and night for a fuller enjoyment of Him and Him alone. What a great, great definition to end our study of devotional spirituality.